Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. All right, today we've got a ton of information about Biodexa Pharmaceuticals,
BDRA.
BDRX, and we're going to take a close look. You sent us a lot of information, a company overview, their recent performance, the financial health, some potential red flags, some strengths, how the market feels about them, their competitive position, and where they might be going in the future. Plus all their recent developments like their clinical trials, their patents, and how that's all impacting the stock price. So we're going to take all this information and we're going to break it down for you so that you understand what is most important about this company right now. So let's get started.
It does seem like we've got a pretty good overall picture.
Yeah, a good overall picture from all these different sources.
Yeah, so we should be able to dive pretty deeply into all the different aspects of the company here.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics. What is Biodexa Pharmaceuticals? Well, they're a UK-based company. They're still in the clinical stage, meaning they're testing treatments in humans, but they don't have any approved products on the market yet. And they are really focused on developing treatments for, I don't know, I guess you'd call them high unmet medical needs, things like brain cancers, FAP, and type 1 diabetes. And their lead program is called eRapa.
I was reading about that one.
Yeah, and it's an oral tablet of rapamycin. And it's designed to have better bioavailability, so more of the drug gets absorbed by the body to treat FAP.
Right.
And they're also working on these, I don't know, these fancy drug delivery systems like Q-Sphera and MidaSolve. So they're really trying to innovate, right? Come up with new ways to deliver these drugs, tackling these big medical challenges. Kind of cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, so the thing that jumped out to me is, that strategic focus on these areas with limited treatment options right now. I mean, that's often, I think that often leads to a more streamlined regulatory process, right? When you're working with the FDA. And if they are successful, they could have huge market share, right? Because there's really no competition in those areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But so now let's talk about how the market has reacted to Biodexa. So their stock, BDRX, has been all over the place. I mean, it was around 1.23, but there are some forecasts out there suggesting it could go way up. I'm talking like averaging 8.65 by the end of 2025.
Wow, that's
I know.
pretty significant.
But then, back in October of 2024, it jumped after they got this extension to meet Nasdaq listing requirements, which followed a reverse stock split.
So what was the reverse stock split for?
No, it reduces the number of outstanding shares and increases the price per share. Sometimes companies will do this to meet those minimum listing requirements, but it doesn't actually change the overall value of the company.
Oh, I see.
But they needed an extension and a reverse split to even stay listed on the Nasdaq, and that's a red flag, right? I mean, that means the stock price was below that minimum requirement for a while, and that suggests that there's not a lot of confidence out there.
Right, so this isn't just some technicality either. This really can impact their ability to raise capital in the future, and then it impacts how the market sees them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the interesting part, right? Because of this volatility, it's all tied to these fundamental challenges and whether or not they can actually address them.
Yeah, and needing a reverse stock split to stay on the Nasdaq, that signals that there have been some difficulties.
Yeah.
It's almost like a startup that just needs constant infusions of cash just to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And while they did address that listing requirement, I think you have to remember how volatile these early stage companies are and the kind of pressure that they're always under.
Yeah, definitely. And, the information that we got about their finances was kind of limited, but we know that they did a $5 million registered direct offering back in July of 2024.
Which is when a company sells shares directly to institutional investors, right?
Right. And as a clinical stage biotech company, they're facing huge research and development costs. I mean, that's just typical, right? Before they have products on the market bringing in that revenue.
Sure.
So, we have to watch that financing, that need for financing.
Yeah, I mean, their reliance on external funding at this point is a big factor. It's common in biotech, but it also means they're super susceptible to what the market is doing and how investors are feeling when they need more money.
Right. And that could be a big problem.
It could, especially with interest rates and everything else going on. Yeah.
So we have some red flags and strengths emerging here, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that Nasdaq listing compliance is a red flag.
Yeah.
Needing more financing all the time. I mean, they're under financial pressure, but they have this really innovative pipeline, and they're focusing on unmet medical needs, and they're not just doing one thing. I mean, they're targeting multiple different conditions. So that diversification could actually be a good thing because it reduces their risk.
Yeah, the diversification is a good strategic move,
Yeah.
but it also means that they're allocating resources to all these different complex areas, which, could actually delay progress on eRapa.
Right.
So it's a balancing act that they have to manage.
Yeah, it is. So what about the market sentiment? How does the market feel about Biodexa?
Well, the recent articles, they're all talking about that stock volatility, about them trying to stay listed on the Nasdaq. But then you have these analyst forecasts that are super positive about the stock price and suggesting that there is potential upside.
I did see them. But we don't have the specific analyst ratings or anything from social media, so that's something you'd have to look into if you're thinking about investing.
Yeah, I mean, without those specifics from the analyst reports, it's hard to say how much they actually believe in those positive forecasts. We need to understand why they think that, what they're assuming about the clinical trial success and whether the market will actually adopt this drug.
Exactly. And remember, forecasts are predictions. They're not guarantees. So we talked about some internal things, right? Their finances. But what about externally? What's the competition like? Biodexa is in the biopharmaceutical industry, and that is tough. I mean, you've got these giants out there like Pfizer and Merck.
Oh, yeah.
And then even smaller biotechs that are more focused, like Agenus and Inovio Pharmaceuticals.
All right.
So their advantage seems to be their innovative drug delivery systems and their focus on these areas where there aren't a lot of treatments available. But that niche focus could also be a problem, right? Higher reward, but also a higher risk.
Well, it's true. I mean, they're trying to innovate in a space that is really crowded.
Yeah. So,
But that strategy of targeting those niche markets, I think that could set them apart. If they can prove that their technology is better at delivering these therapies, existing ones or new ones, they can really gain a foothold even with these big players out there.
yeah, yeah. Looking ahead, there's some things that could be really good for Biodexa. Like if they make progress in those clinical trials, especially with eRapa, that could be huge. And we know they've started a phase 3 trial for eRapa in treating FAP, and they got a fast track designation from the FDA.
Oh, wow.
So that
I
means
was going to ask about that. What does that even mean?
yeah, so that means the FDA is giving it priority review, which means it could get approved faster. And they're also going to have these earnings reports, right? So we'll get a better look at their financial health as time goes on. But of course, there are risks, like you said before, with the regulations and just how unpredictable this market is.
Yeah, I mean, those are really significant milestones, the phase 3 trial and that fast track status. But we can't forget that clinical trials fail all the time.
Right.
And even with fast track, it's not guaranteed that it will get approved.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So there was some recent news besides just the trials and the fast track status. They actually got a U.S. patent for eRapa,
Wow.
which they had licensed from Mtora Biosciences, and that could be big. And they partnered with Precision for Medicine to handle the European part of the phase 3 study, and then LumaBridge for the U.S. part of the operation. So they're really trying to be smart about these trials, working with experts in different places.
Yeah, these partnerships can be so valuable, especially with companies that already know how to run these clinical trials and deal with the regulations. I mean, that could really increase the chances of it actually being successful.
Right. And it definitely has had an impact on the stock price. I mean, we saw it go up by almost 20% on April 4th of this year, and then almost 14% on March 19th. So the stock is really sensitive to good news. But then some analysts think the stock is overvalued, and maybe it's even a short selling opportunity. So you have these different opinions out there.
Yeah, these price jumps after good news, that's pretty common for a biotech company in this phase. But I mean, when you have analysts saying, oh, you should short this stock, it just shows how much uncertainty there is and how much the price could swing depending on what happens in the future, especially with this phase 3 trial.
Yeah. Yeah, so overall, the biotech sector is really volatile, but Biodexa's progress in cancer treatment, and all these partnerships, it seems like they're in a better spot than some other companies. And we know that companies like TC Biopharm and BP, they get mentioned in the same breath, when you're talking about the trends in the sector. So the whole industry affects Biodexa too.
It does. And I mean, the biotech sector, it's driven by innovation and these clinical breakthroughs. And Biodex's recent success, especially with the fast track designation, that's the kind of thing that gets rewarded. But, we have to remember that the whole sector is affected by all kinds of things, regulatory changes, and just the overall feeling about risk.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the risks and the opportunities. That fast track designation, that's a big opportunity to really speed things up, but
Yeah.
they still have to go through the regulatory process and the trial outcomes. There's a lot of risk there. And they're not profitable yet. I mean, that's a concern. But they have a lot of cash on hand, right? And all these partnerships. So that gives them potential to grow. And then you've got these broader things like interest rates and inflation that can really mess with how a stock performs.
Yeah, and how investors are feeling and whether or not they have the money to invest.
Right, and how much money the company can even raise.
Exactly. It's really all these internal factors and the external factors kind of pushing and pulling.
Yeah. Okay, so last thing, let's talk about this due diligence report. We got a much deeper look into their finances here, and their recent revenue was around $578,000. We don't have their exact earnings per share numbers, but we know they're not making a profit. And that's pretty normal for a company in this stage because they're putting so much money into research and development. Their debt is pretty low, which is great, and they're not paying dividends, which again is typical for a growth-focused biotech company.
Yeah, they're reinvesting everything back in.
Yeah, and their price-to-book ratio suggests that maybe it's undervalued based on their book value. But, biotech future potential is way more important than their current book value because investors are really betting on these breakthroughs that could happen.
Yeah, and these metrics are really just a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
They show that they're focused on future growth and not current profitability.
Mm-hmm.
That low debt is definitely reassuring, though.
Right. And the report really highlights their competitive advantage. They've got those drug delivery systems, they've got the patent for eRapa, and they're focusing on these niche areas. And the good news about the fast track and the patent, that's really giving investors confidence. But we can't forget about the risks. I mean, trials can fail, the FDA can say no.
And, the report is a good reminder that even with all the excitement around the good news, we have to remember the challenges and uncertainties that come with any clinical stage biotech company.
All right, so let's put this all together. Biodexa Pharmaceuticals, BDRX, is a company that's trying to do some really important work. They're going after these big medical problems with new technologies, and they've had some good news lately. Their trials are moving forward, they got a patent, they're working with great partners, and the stock price is up. But we have to remember they've had problems too. They almost got kicked off the Nasdaq, and they need money. And the analysts, they don't all agree on what's going to happen. And the fast track designation is great, but they still have a lot of hurdles to get through.
Yeah. So it's really this contrast between their potential, right, and the reality of their finances and just how hard it is to develop drugs. And when you look at it from an investment perspective, you see that it's high risk and high reward.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a question for you. Does this level of risk fit with your investing strategy?
Right. That's the big question. And we really encourage you to look into it yourself. Look at their clinical trials, look at their finances, get those details. That's how you're going to be able to make your own decision about whether or not to invest. And thank you for letting us know about Biodexa Pharmaceuticals. If you liked this, please subscribe, like, and leave us a comment and let us know what other companies you want us to look at. We appreciate you being here.